tumbling through 1,000 centuries. You don't know where you land. It's so dark in mythology. Treasures of history to be found. Hear the legends of time. All the handiworks remain. Only the dream away. Orion, not yet. Orion, not yet. Orion, not here.
Hi, I've decided to take a break from hating New Who and instead concentrate on Classic Who. I'm not going to trash it. Well, I will a bit. Instead, I'm going to celebrate Doctor Who's 50th anniversary by doing almost 30 videos taking you through the classic series. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but I get the feeling that most people who watch this will be New Who fans, so you could consider this a prep on the subject of classic Doctor Who that you can use to decide which stories, if any, you'd like to watch. I'll be doing one short video a season, between 5 and 10 minutes long, giving some info on the stories in that season, what noteworthy things happened in it, basically anything I feel like. This video will be an even more brief prep on the subject of classic Doctor Who, so if you only watch one of these videos, make it this one. Good work for watching! And if you watch the others, please remember that almost 100 episodes of the first 6 seasons of the show are missing. So if instead of footage you see a series of still images, don't worry, you're not going mad and your net's probably not broken. That's just a reconstruction. The first Doctor was old and is usually characterised as crotchety. He wasn't particularly warm. He's basically the Doctor without the moderating influence of humanity. Yelling, kidnapping people, trying to bludgeon cavemen to death, threatening to strand people. In short, he's much better than the 10th Doctor. His first companion was Susan, who appears to be his granddaughter, though I subscribe to the theory that she was from Gallifrey's past and was the granddaughter of the Other, a mythological Time Lord figure who the Doctor is a reincarnation of. I'll try not to go into any more detail about that. He lasted for 3 years, and his era introduced the Doctor, obviously, the TARDIS, the Daleks, the first antagonistic renegade Time Lord, the Monk, the Cybermen, and Regeneration, though they didn't call it that for about another 10 years. If you want to see one or two of his stories, I'd suggest the first episode of An Unearthly Child, and either the Aztecs or the Time Meddler. They're my personal favourites. The second Doctor was the first to be overtly comedic. He was a funny little man, totally unthreatening and acting more like a big kid, but at the same time using all that to hide a mind like a steel trap. He's mine, Peter Davison, Colin Baker and Matt Smith's favourite Doctor. And honestly, characterisation-wise, most of the Doctors that followed owe more to the second Doctor than they do to the first. He was the first truly eccentric and funny Doctor. He lasted for 3 seasons, and his era introduced My Favourite Companion, Jamie, the Sonic Screwdriver, the Doctor's love of jelly babies, the Macra, the Great Intelligence, the Brigadier, Unit, the Ice Warriors, and the Time Lords themselves, as a group. If you only want to see one or two of his, I'd suggest The Mind Robber and the last episode of the War Games. The third Doctor spent much of his life trapped on Earth and assisting Unit with the alien invasion of the week. Well, the alien invasion of the story. The show was retooled from the usual Doctor plus companion or two drop into a place and have fun, to having a larger recurring cast, a home base, and even the occasional overarching plot. The third Doctor was suave, energetic, and the closest thing to classically heroic he's ever been. He drove fast cars, and a fast flying car, and knew martial arts, and because it was the 70s, he did so while dressing like a white, upper-class English Jimi Hendrix. He lasted for 5 seasons, and his era introduced the Autons, the Silurians, the Master, the most famous companion in the show's history, Sarah Jane Smith, the Sontarans, the name of Gallifrey, and the term regeneration. If you want to see one of his stories, then I suggest Inferno, but be warned, it has the worst-looking monsters ever seen in a great Doctor Who story. At least until the caves of Androzani's magma monster happened. The fourth Doctor is, bar none, the most famous incarnation of the Doctor. Sure, nowadays people might think of a spiky hairdo and a brown pinstripe suit when they think of the Doctor, but when Tennant's been the most famous for 40 straight years, then I'll amend my opinion. 10 might rule the pop culture roost right now, but he's a lot of catching up to do to rival 4. 4 was weird. That's the best way to describe him. Weird. He was also easily the least human incarnation. He hated authority and would do almost anything in his power to defy it. He's the favourite Doctor of Nash, David Tennant and SF Debris. His was less one single era and more like 3 of them. Early on the emphasis was on gothic horror sci-fi, which later mutated into almost comedy and finally into straight science fiction. He lasted for 7 seasons in his era introduced to the Zygons, which are coming back in the 50th anniversary special, and K9. If you want to see one of his stories, I'd suggest The Horror of Fang Rock, in which a lighthouse is menaced by a Rutan, the sworn enemies of the Sontarans. The Fifth Doctor was the first very human Doctor. He was young, gentle, kindly, and if I was inclined to suggest that the Doctor had a sexuality, I'd say he was one of the gay ones. Not to be insulting about gay doctors, I would also put the second Doctor as gay too, and he's my favourite. He was the first Doctor since 1 to have a companion die, and his lack of celebration when Adric did die makes me think he was fucking him. He was also Stephen Moffat's favourite Doctor. 5 was unguarded and open. He didn't pretend to be harmless to lull adversaries into a false sense of security. He was just mostly harmless. He later reappeared in Time Crash, which makes sense as 10 is basically a hyperactive, awful remake of 5. He lasted for 3 seasons. His era destroyed the sonic screwdriver and featured the last pure historical, a story set in the past with no science fiction elements barring the Doctor, the companions, and the TARDIS. If you only want to see one of his stories, then check out The Caves of Androzani. Apart from being one of the best stories in the show's history, it killed the Fifth Doctor off, which just makes it even better. The Sixth Doctor was a reaction against the Fifth. Where the Fifth was quiet, kindly and the meekest the character had ever been, 6 was an attempt to recreate the sort of man that 1 was. He was theatrical, melodramatic, blustery, arrogant, and had an almost fanatical devotion to doing good. A bit like Ace Rimmer, but smarter and a little less competent and crossed with Brian Blessed. He's the favourite Doctor of the Omega, and Teddy the Minion, and my second favourite. His was the most unsettled era of the show. It was put in hiatus, the entire staff of the BBC at some time or another wanted to end the show, the writing wasn't very good, and baffling production decisions abounded. He lasted for 2 seasons, and his era introduced the Valeyard, an antagonistic alternate incarnation of the Doctor that laid the groundwork for the Dream Lord and John Hurt's incarnation in the 50th anniversary. If you want to see the best from his television stuff, then check out Revelation of the Daleks or Vengeance on Varos. Now, they're not classics. 6 was very badly served by stories. If you want the absolute best from him, then check out almost anything he did on the Big Finish audio adventures. 7 started off as a crapper rerun of 2. It was short, people didn't take him seriously, he was there to be lighthearted and to make you laugh. Unfortunately, he didn't use all that to manipulate his enemies. He was just kinda silly. Then Andrew Cartmel arrived, and he started with the manipulation, and he kinda never stopped. Later in his era, he was constantly planning. Several times we discovered late on that he'd already arranged the victory before the episode had even begun. He played chess with gods and rarely had to upend the board to win. He's the favourite incarnation of Linkara. He was the final Doctor of the classic series. He lasted for 3 seasons, and his era introduced the idea of having an ordinary working-class teen from London as a companion, an idea later on reused with Rose. So now you know who to blame. If you want to see some of his good ones, then check out The Curse of Fenric for some classic World War II set sea vampires from the future. And if you want something good but nearly incomprehensible, check out Ghostlight. Now, I'm not going to include 8 in my series. His movie is an island between Classic and New Who, and while if I'm forced to put him somewhere, I normally stick him in Classic Who, I'm not being forced, so I'm not going to include him. His movie would be a good place for anyone familiar with the new series to start with older Who, as in many ways it set the template for the new series. Just be warned that the gorgeous production values aside, it's not very good and semi-frequently makes no fucking sense. So that's that. Join me soon for the first season of Classic Doctor Who, an unearthly child to the reign of terror.
Stumble